Joining us, New York Times chief White House correspondent and MS Now contributor Peter Baker, host of the Bulwark podcast and MS Now political analyst Tim Miller, Washington Post foreign affairs columnist and MS Now contributor David Ignatius, and Washington Post columnist and senior fellow for the National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, Max Boot. Peter, let's talk about this peace deal, this proposal. Marco Rubio said earlier today they're waiting on the Iranians. What is the latest?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the Iranians are playing for time, clearly. You know, the president said a few days ago they had, I think, 48 hours to make a decision. And we, I think, reached that point and we haven't got a decision from Iran. And the truth is, this is not really a peace deal so much as an agreement to negotiate a peace deal, right? So the president has put out some of his priorities on this one-page list, but any actual peace deal would have to have a whole lot more details, a whole lot more specifics than anything we're talking about here. So the idea is to get to a point where we can have a 30-day negotiation where they can work those things out. So even at this point, even if they were to agree to this, it would simply be extending, in effect, the ceasefire to then see if they can get returned to the table and put together something more comprehensive and more substantive.
What about the Iranian side, David Ignatius? Because there's been a lot of talk about how the Iranians don't want a deal. The Iranians are more hardline. A lot of chatter about how much harder line the new Ayatollah is. What do we know for sure about what the Iranians are looking for right now?
We don't know as much as we'd like, but from the conversations that I've had with people close to the negotiations, their impression is that the Iranian side is split. There was a meeting face-to-face in Islamabad several weeks ago. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, was there. By the end of the meeting, there was generally a positive feeling, although no deal was reached. It appears then he was hit hard by criticism when he returned home from harder line members of the IRGC that's really running the government now in Tehran. My sense is that one thing the administration wants to do through back-channel contacts is to try to play off these different factions, looking for a group that's prepared to make a deal that the U.S. is prepared to put quite a lot of money behind in terms of released impounded Iranian funds, end of sanctions. But I think given that split in Tehran, it's hard to make predictions now about how far they're going to be willing to move. As Peter Baker said earlier, they're playing for time. They think that Trump wants a ceasefire more than they do, needs one politically more than they do. So I think that's the reason for the delay. But perhaps by the end of today, we'll have an Iranian response and know better.
There has been reporting that I found pretty interesting lately coming from people who are pretty well sourced within Iran. One of them is a New York Times reporter that's been covering it, did a long conversation on the Daily talking about how much more transactional this whatever this leadership, the current configuration is, how much more transactional it is likely to be than the old theocratic leadership, even if it's worse for the Iranian people. Then Tim Miller had a great conversation just the other day with Arash Azizi, and Arash was saying that he believes that there is more of a desire for a deal from the Iranians, and that the idea that the hardest of hardliners are the ones that are in control is belied by the evidence in front of us. So Tim, I found that conversation to be really enlightening, and it really pushed back against some of our preconceived notions about the way this war has been going.
Yeah, I agree with that. Arash, who's from Iran, is so smart on this and has been covering it as a historian. And I think the point that he was trying to make is that the now dead Ayatollah Khamenei was simultaneously extremely ideological and extremely cautious, and did not want to be seen to be making any deals with this administration, and that led to this kind of Iran to the place where they were before this war started, and that this new regime, when people say hard line, they might think of it kind of in the theocratic sense, or they might think about it in the negotiation sense. But I think that his point was, maybe a better way to put it is I'm paraphrasing, but it's like hard-nosed, right? And and that they are going to want to be tougher about this, and maybe they would be willing to make a deal. The problem with that, as David Ignatius has laid out there, is there still isn't like a clear person to make the deal, right? And I think that while, that Arash is, I think observations are right about where the Iranian leadership directionally wants to go, nobody wants to be seen as the sop. And I think that they can look at right now and see that they have leverage and see that Donald Trump wants to get out of this war. And so you can be hard-nosed and pragmatic and say, well, let's wait it out and see how much more we can get out of Trump. Because who the heck knows? Trump is known to give terrible deals. And I think that puts Trump in a very tough situation. And I think that explains in part why, he's calling up Bret Baier saying we're going to get a deal every 2 days. And, nothing is coming because the Iranians see that he wants that deal badly.
Yeah, I've got a piece of news from the president that bolsters that, but I'm going to put that aside for a moment. I'll bring it back to this conversation in just a second. I want to talk about one of the things that I think we can say for sure regarding this war, and that is the damage it's done to our perception overseas, not just our general perception. Reuters has some striking numbers about how the globe now sees us worse than they see Russia. But our allies specifically, Max, are they looking at us now and saying that there's already been questions from NATO about our reliability. Now the Gulf states have tangible evidence about our reliability.
Yeah, I think the picture that we're painting for the world is that we are a very bellicose nation that doesn't really know what it's doing and tends to blunder into conflicts and doesn't know how to get out. And I think, this week you saw the unease of even our Gulf allies, with the Saudis and the Kuwaitis reportedly saying that they would not grant the U.S. access to their airspace after the fiasco of Project Freedom, where Trump announced that he was going to send U.S. warships to try to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And then that led to a military confrontation with Iran. The Iranians hit the Emiratis, and Trump kind of backed off and said, whoops, never mind. And I think the Gulf states feel very exposed because thanks to Trump, they're on the front lines of a war that they didn't ask for. And they're very concerned that now Trump is going to exit the conflict and leave them at the mercy of Iran. And I think that's a serious danger. And of course, Trump is also, lighting on fire our European alliance because he's blaming NATO for not bailing him out of this war that he started. So, we're looking like a kind of a clueless, wounded hegemon coming out of this. And I don't think that's a good look where, Trump still, with this war that was supposed to last 4 or 5 weeks now in its third month, and Trump still can't figure out how to end the war or how to break the Iranian chokehold over the Strait of Hormuz.
What about these numbers about our reputation on the world stage, David? What does it mean when perceptions of America drop so dramatically and also so quickly? Across 84 countries, the 84 countries that evaluated the U.S., 22 had a net positive perception, while 62 had a net negative perception. The average net perception of the U.S. is negative 16, ranking 128 out of 132 countries. Russia, by the way, negative 11%. China, plus 7%. David, what does it mean when regular people, see the United States so poorly?
Is that the United States has a big problem. Our power in the world, our ability to have the extraordinary success we've had through my lifetime has been a product and part of the good friends and allies that we've had. We built a global trading system that's made other people richer, but has also made us vastly richer. And it's been based on a confidence that the United States will maintain a degree of order in the world. It's a very corrupt world. The United States traditionally has had rule of law, the kind of rule of law that allows people to do business with confidence and safety. As that collapses, and those numbers make clear that it is collapsing, a lot of the kind of structure on which American power, security, economic prosperity rests, I think becomes fragile. I don't mean to say we're on the verge of collapse, but those numbers should really scare people. Not because other countries don't like us; they've represented America for decades, but because this kind of negative feeling ends up eroding a source of our power in the world.
Yeah, soft power. Peter, is the president, I know, does not live in a reality where this sort of thing would matter to him. But I'm asking, are there people in the administration who are looking down the line and thinking about maybe their own time in the White House if they get there? Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, whoever else, and wondering how much damage they're going to have to try to repair.
Well, it's hard not to look at yesterday's visit to the Vatican by Secretary Rubio in contrast to the president's comments about the Pope and even Vice President Vance's comments about the Pope lately, right? Rubio did what American leaders traditionally do. You go and you meet with somebody who is a global leader like the Pope. You may not agree on everything. You may even allude to those disagreements, but you don't have an out and out, fight with the father of, the father figure to one of the, the world's largest and most, historic religions. You try to find a way to smooth over those differences rather than to accentuate them. That's different, obviously, than you see from this White House. This is a White House that likes to accentuate differences. It likes to punch up and to make any fight bigger rather than smaller. So Rubio, I think, would be an example of what you're talking about, somebody who's looking at the long term, thinking, okay, it's not necessarily in America's interest to be on a fight with everybody at all times. Let's try to see if we can't make some of these, go away, or if not go away, at least not so disruptive.